Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline Riddick-Seals, and this is my Keystone project, which was advised by Dr. Kristen Leahy, entitled The Blackberry Patch, Stories of Friendship Street, a Cultural Preservation Project. To begin, my Keystone really explores the ways in which art making and cultural collective memory converge. The problem that I was running into was that I felt as if the traditional methods of archiving were not enough to capture the emotional aspect of cultural collective memory. Essentially, in my perspective, the archive is great at documenting and surveilling Black body, but not great at preserving the cultural history as well as preserving Black humanity. So for my project, I decided to use several methodologies, including archival research, art historical research as well, conduct an oral history interview of my own family, and then process that history through visual art and written stories. So in this collection, here's a beginning of some of the artworks that I made for this process. As you can see, here is the convergence of all of those methodologies: photography, collage, archival research, etc. To begin, I started some art historical research into this quilting community in Gee's Bend, Alabama. This is a centuries-old artistic community of women, and this culture was really started out of slavery and has been continued since. What's amazing about these quilts is that these women have used the material history of their lives to create art pieces that preserve their histories for future generations. A strong example of this will be Work Clothes Quilt, which is on our left. Mary Lee Bendolph used the denim from the men working in her life to create this quilt so that people of future generations can access this material history. I also looked at the contemporary photographer Carrie Mae Weems. She's a very preeminent photographer in Black culture. What she does is put Black reality and Black stereotype in direct contrast in her work, often with humor. And she also puts photography and prose in relationship with each other. Her work often explores the family as well as the traditional archive and subverts this archive specifically in the context of photography. I also researched the work of Ntozake Shange. She is a poet and playwright. Her work uses poetry and abstract movement in order to challenge or express difficult parts of life for Black women in her generation. She is known for creating the concept of a choreo poem, which puts together movement and poetry in order to physically move and verbally move through these stories. What I learned from all of these women was that abstraction often is a tool of preserving these histories in a way that is honoring the privacy of the story that you're conveying and really does touch into the emotion and vitality that the archive simply cannot on its own. So I decided to conduct an oral history of my own family. Here's a photograph of my elders. This is a photo taken from my grandmother's archive. With this pointer, let's see how effective I am. I can show you my family. Here is my grandmother, Angela, and next is my great-aunt, Channa. These are the women that I conducted the oral history interviews with. Here is their middle brother, my Uncle Kamel, their oldest brother, Jimmy, and their youngest brother, Chris, here. And then here are Annie Seal and James, my great-great-grandparents, which I've had the honor of knowing. Out of this photograph, Angela and Channa are the only ones with us, meaning that they hold the trove of the family, of the Fleming family story. It was such an honor to interview them and learn more about my family through their stories. Here are childhood photographs of my grandmother and great aunt. I conducted a series of oral history interviews with these women over the course of 5 months. We aimed for an hour, they usually ended up being 2. And it was often individual phone calls with each of them, and we had a series of collective interviews as well. My initial questions had to do with the photographs that came out of my grandmother's archive. So here's a photograph of these people I don't know. Who are they? What are we doing? And then it grew into talking about their childhood experiences growing up in Enterprise, Alabama. Enterprise is a city in southern Alabama. Specifically, they're from a side called Bennett Side, which is a historical Black community in that area, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But basically, I talked to them a lot about their times growing up in the transition from the Civil Rights Movement into the 70s as young Black women in this culture. What I learned, however, is that the home that they lived in ended up being a central point of their lives. It is an intergenerational home. So the home place for the family is 525 Friendship Street. These are images that I took from Google Earth. In the center here is 525. This is our intergenerational home place. So my great-grandfather, James, which you previously saw, built this home in the mid-60s, in which my grandmother and her siblings lived, my father and his brothers lived, and I even had the honor of living in as a toddler. This home is no longer with us, which is part of something that has happened in this area of Alabama. As newer generations in Bennett's side have aged, most of the younger generations have left, meaning that our home and many others on this street no longer exist. This is a photo taken of the same plot this February. So what I've done in this body of work is preserve the home place. The book that I've written follows the stories, the intergenerational stories of me and my great aunt and my grandmother through the various rooms of this house in order to preserve the home place in its absence. So for this collection of work, I've written several stories. I think it's about 20 different vignettes and excerpts, as well as academic essays processing all of this work, as well as created a body of work. And I can think of no better way of sharing this with you than reading you some excerpts of this piece, as well as showing you the works that I've created. So I'll begin. How do you write about something you've lost? How do you write about red clay earth and the roots it feeds, seeing through veils and dim glasses? I stand here before you, squirming as my tongue knots and rolls. But you know why I'm here. Tall grass and kudzu kiss where you once stood, where I stand now. And I've come to you with questions, but will you answer me? The last time I was here, we cried together, our tears anointing walls that are now dust beneath my feet. So here I kneel, and I beg, will you answer me? Magnolia tree and an olive grove, no flowers when you asked for them, unless, of course, your innards are strewn over red clay earth, tickled by blackberry burrs, too bitter, too late. Only then will sweet juice rain down in pity, white flag over red earth, white petal over black blood, sweet like, bitter like, sweet like. How do you call back to a quilted living room, cold fridge, humid cricket skies, to say magnolia trees grow here too? So, how do you write about someone you've lost? How do you write about fire? How do you write about bodies buried in riverbanks and the roots they feed? How do you write about ripe fruit and blackberry juice? I came to you with questions and you questioned me in return. So here I'm again with nothing to ask but forgiveness. Good morning, blue light. Do you remember me? I saw you last night through the veil, cold air kissing cold floor, dancing in cold light. I knew you then, like I know you now, but do you remember me? You promised you would. No tongue to speak, no eye to see, and yet you promised me. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'm open to questions.
So Madeline, we'll open it up to questions now.
Hi, thank you. The pieces that you read were really beautiful. Is there a place or a future date that we can look forward to where we could see your whole collection of work?
I am considering publishing. Well, yeah, we'll see. I think part of it also is that I'm working through the kind of language that I want to keep private versus share with the public. I think the biggest point, or the biggest thing that I've discovered while working on this is that privacy for me is very important, which is also why I lean into abstraction. So there's a way for me and my grandmother and great aunt that this has been a form of artistic processing. And I think after the buzz of it all being over, I think we'll be able to soberly analyze how much we're comfortable sharing. And then from that point, I will be sure to share if and what I publish.
This is beautiful, thank you. One thing that we discussed in my Kilachand course last semester frequently was how with oral history, and especially with family, as you get closer to those close to you in a way that you might not traditionally, you can kind of like uncover uncomfortable truths or like have difficult conversations. So is there anything you'd like to share that either surprised you about speaking with your family or just that I guess was unexpected?
I'm trying to think. I think the hardest part of conducting the oral history was realizing how much we have lost, you know? And because it was a process of unearthing these stories, I mean, eventually you'd just sit and be like, oh man, like we'd talk and talk for hours about these people that we know and love. And then it'd be like, okay, well, I'll call you next week, you know? I found that to be the most surprising was how much there was left to linger. And just also how much had changed. That was the most surprising thing. Yeah.
This has been fantastic. I'm really curious, when you're usually making a work of art for a certain kind of audience, like say it's a museum or gallery audience, how has that been different from creating something as intimate as your interpretation or like remaking of a family archive?
Oh, yeah.
Does that, obviously it changes your process, but were there things that you found yourself focusing on that you're not able to when you're making art for, you know, like say the galleries?
Yeah. So for some context, I'm a scenic designer. So most of the paintings that I make, I don't actually get to decide what's on it. It's more like adapting a text that I've been given. In this similar way, a lot of these pieces ended up being adaptations of things that I was given. But I found that the biggest difference was in the process itself. So making a lot of these, especially the collages, ended up being frenetic. My roommate Danny's here. They know what the floor looked like when I was making them. And it ended up just being an energetic difference. So a lot of like letting go and doing the work, as opposed to it being active choice making as you go. And what I found was that I'd make the pieces and I'd be able to connect it to a story more than read the story and make the piece. I saw Issa first.
Hi, Maddie.
Hey.
Amazing presentation. I'm not surprised. I mean, everything you do is awesome. But as you were, especially reading some of your excerpts, I felt myself getting really emotional, and I can only imagine that that feeling is magnified in your experience tenfold at minimum. What kinds of things did you find you had to do to help yourself process? How did you take care of yourself during the process of this? Because I think that's an important step of a process like this, learning to toe the fine line between uncovering and doing something that makes progress while also choosing to like preserve and protect yourself from.
The biggest thing was calling my dad, who's sitting right there. I'd often call I would learn so much. Apparently I've been like the first person to ask certain questions. So I'd get information and my mind would be blown and I was like, what do I even do with this? And so I'd often call my dad and be like, Dad, did you know this, this, and this, like da 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 da. Or it'd be like, I'm struggling with processing this, how I needed someone who had been there to really just help me lift that. So my dad and my family was a very good support. And often in the conversations with my grandmother and great aunt, we would have that kind of sharing too, where we'd be able to sit in like the difficult stuff together. And then the act of writing actually ended up being a beautiful process for me. I got to just sit, let it out, and then read it and be like, okay, I understand that this is more emotionally involved than I might have thought before. So the process of the art making was also very helpful. Dante.
Thank you. How do you see this project growing with you in your future as you transition away from Boston University?
So Dante's trying to make me flex a little bit. This is a known question. I have recently been awarded some money for the future of my career. And it's such an honor. Thank you. I appreciate it. And so with this money, I'm continuing this project further. Like I said previously, a lot of Friendship Street, the lots are vacant, and so I'll be conducting this oral history interview with the community that used to be there and is currently there, and making scale model reconstructions of the homes and the rooms that no longer exist, and connecting it to these oral histories. So I'll be extending this out to the larger community in order to have this larger commemorative process. So thank you all.